Hello, I'm Ashir.
Hello, I'm Jason.
And we're here to present you California's water contamination crisis. So we are students from AMHS Archbishop Mitty High School. And as you can see, we're surrounded by bodies of water. The water is all around us in the forms of rivers, lakes, and oceans. But what many of us often take for granted is that most of the water that we consume is clean and safe. Many people don't have that luxury, even here in California.
So, what are the problems? California's two major problems mostly concern water and energy. You can see this manifest through various ways, such as Senate Bill 100, which pushes California towards a completely renewable energy path by 2030. However, the issue that we'll be focusing on throughout the presentation will be water and safe and clean access.
So, water quality in the San Joaquin Valley and other parts of the Central Valley is some of the worst nationwide. However, many of the residents aren't even aware of this, as testing of private wells is not required, and many water agencies simply don't provide quality water reports.
One of the biggest concerns for Central Valley communities is nitrate pollution. Currently in the Central Valley, there is an epidemic of unclean water derived from years of agricultural fertilizer use. Excess nitrogen from these fertilizers percolates through the soil and into aquifers and groundwater. And because water sources for the inhabitants of Central Valley come from these wells rather than the Sierra Nevada, like for San Francisco or for San Jose, they are extremely susceptible to such pollution.
So as you can see, this kid encounters several problems relating to the contamination of water supplies in his area. You may have heard of similar situations in Flint, Michigan. It was highly publicized in 2016, yet still no significant change was made, even to this day. As a result, many people continue to struggle with water contamination problems in their local areas. Although some people, like this fictitious person we have created, are fortunate enough to move out, many are not, and are forced to stay with areas with contaminated water and are forced to deal with such problems on a daily basis.
So, in Shiloh Elementary School, which I actually have visited, it is only a few hours from our school, their water fountains are mostly covered in plastic bags due to the fact that they're contaminated with such nitrates. And in the Central Valley, in many schools such as Shiloh, often have levels of nitrates or arsenic and even uranium that are exceeding state regulation standards. And this often leads to these schools being forced to purchase clean water on a daily basis, which may in fact be some of the only sources of clean water that children in these communities can actually access.
Altogether, over 1 million people don't have safe drinking water in California. Clearly, this is a problem. So here are some outcomes of this water contamination. As a result of contamination in these areas, the average rate of sudden infant death syndrome is 252% of the state rate. The average rate of conditions originating in the prenatal period is 250% of the state rate. The average rate of miscarriage is 211% of the state rate, and the average rate of cancers, a variety ranging from pancreatic to colon cancers, is 153% of the state rate. And these are just some of the symptoms.
Besides these health detriments, there are many economic burdens to families due to nitrate contamination. Families in the Central Valley often must pay up to a tenth of their incomes just so they can access clean water for their families. And as of now, the current nitrate pollution problem has a $7.5 million price tag, and schools currently pay $5,500 to $7,200 a year just for clean drinking water access.
This is very much a social justice issue. Poor people across California are having to spend up to 10% of their income on bottled water alone. On top of this issue is disproportionately affecting Hispanics. Although Hispanics comprise only half the population of some of these areas, they make up to 3/4 of the total population that is affected by water contamination in their water supplies.
So why is this a problem? In recent years, there was a struggle between Governor Jerry Brown and the urban water districts, and to understand what truly happened, you can consider the following.
So what we have set up for you here is an example that some of you may be able to relate to. So a policy proposal that some of you may suggest is that everybody receives a 5G network and infinite data. And although this may seem good, especially for people living in the Silicon Valley, many people in rural areas may not support this, as their money really isn't going towards helping. Similarly, urban water districts claim that we shouldn't have to pay money for water as an excuse to not consider the bill of cleaning up water treatment plants in the San Joaquin Valley and other more rural areas that do not affect them directly.
But change may be on the horizon as our new Governor Gavin Newsom has made confronting California's contaminated water drinking crisis a top priority in his term in office. In his first week, he took his cabinet on a road trip to meet with Central Valley residents, and which for years have been relying on bottled water to supply their drinking water access. And in his budget, he called for a tax on drinking water to help disadvantaged communities clean up their contaminated water sources. And then he signed one of the first pieces of legislation to provide assistance to such communities with unsafe water, including $10 million for emergency drinking water projects. A lot of firsts have occurred during his time as a governor, have been aimed at curtailing this widespread problem, and we only hope that he continues to make this issue a priority.
Altogether, newly elected Governor Gavin Newsom has addressed this problem in his State of the State address by explaining, just this morning, more than 1 million Californians woke up without clean water. He called the situation a moral disgrace and a medical emergency. But in the meantime, what can we do to help fix this problem? So AB-134. AB-134 is a bill that offers a strong solution to these problems that we have discussed. It will create new reporting requirements for safe and affordable drinking water fund that will be used to directly help these disadvantaged communities gain access to clean water on a regular day-to-day basis.
California's biggest issue confronting our crisis is not following through action. The voices of rural communities are often neglected as legislators choose to prioritize other issues, or funding is often reallocated or not given at all. To combat this, precautionary measures to ensure that the Safe Drinking Water Fund is secured will make access more successful.
So why is this important? As of right now, hundreds of non-compliant water suppliers are supplying water to poor, disadvantaged income people. Thousands, as a result, are suffering the consequences. So what this bill will do is create a fund specifically directed towards safe and clean water for all.
So now that we know more about California's water crisis, how can we advocate these bills effectively? So to advocate our concerns to legislators, we can take several steps. The first is to discuss these issues holistically in the context of our communities and the necessary details in the bill. The nitty-gritty is not always necessary, and the priority is to ensure that all legislators first and foremost understand the issue. And next, we can personalize the problem through anecdotes such as our stories about Shell Elementary School, and using ethos that was compelling and can help legislators see the human faces behind these issues. Moreover, we can use the moral argument that safe drinking water is a prerequisite to all. And finally, we can talk about the issue through a personal perspective and why this issue actually matters to you.
So finally, a Catholic perspective. So respect for human life means respecting all of God's creation. We must re-engage with our environment and take responsibility for it. We must live sustainably so there are enough resources for everyone and for future generations to come. The encyclical Laudato Si is the new appeal from Pope Francis addressed to every person living on this planet for an inclusive dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. Pope Francis calls on the Church and the world in general to acknowledge the urgency of our environmental challenges and to join in solidarity in embarking on a new, more sustainable path.
Any questions?
Yeah.
So, does this bill do anything to solve the root cause I think you touched on, the nitrate pollution?
Yeah, so What this will do is create a fund in which future bills can allocate more, but right now $10 million is already being put into this fund. What this fund will do is directing agencies to directly go to these communities and directly give them aid and try to figure out the root cause of these problems so they can be fixed. Thank you.